Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. I am joining you today from beautiful North Vancouver, which is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Today marks a new chapter in the world's ambition. Climate change, as we all know, represents an existential threat to people living everywhere, and especially for our young people. It must be addressed. However, climate change is not just about obligation, it is also about opportunity. Un pays qui ne s'efforce pas de trouver des moyens d'en faire plus tout en polluant moins risque d'être perdant dans la transition mondiale qui se transforme de plus en plus en sprint. Les gagnants attireront davantage d'investissements, créeront plus d'emplois, auront des communautés plus saines et vivront plus longtemps et en meilleure santé. As you heard this morning from Prime Minister Trudeau, Canada is committing to cut its greenhouse gas emissions by 40 to 45% below 2005 levels by 2030. Our new target under the Paris Agreement is an ambitious increase over the previous target. It reflects the scale of the challenge and the economic opportunity that we see for Canadians and the mandate that they have given us. Nous fixons ces objectifs et nous mettons en place ces politiques car le monde n'en demande pas moins et veut que nous soyons fermes dans notre engagement à progresser. When we took office in 2015, emissions were projected to increase by 12% above 2005 levels in 2030, despite the fact that Canada, under the Harper Conservatives, was committed to 30% below 2005 levels by 2030. We got straight to work. We put together Canada's first national climate plan, and we set about implementing it. Without that plan, Canada's emissions today would be 34 megatons higher this year than they are. We are accelerating the phase-out of coal and doing that in a way that recognizes the needs of workers and communities. En remplaçant l'énergie du charbon, le réseau électrique du Canada, qui est déjà sans émissions à 82% et qui est l'un des plus propres de la planète, deviendra encore plus propre. One of the most interesting challenges in climate policy is how to achieve progress everywhere in the world, when not every economy or society is built the same way. As an example, over a quarter of U.S. emissions come from electricity generation. In Canada, electricity generation accounts for just 8% of our emissions. Because we have such a clean grid already, we have to find other ways to cut emissions and achieve the targets that we've set. One way is to use the power of the market to help find other solutions. Putting a price on pollution inspires innovators and ideas that otherwise might never come to light. We are also advancing a nationwide standard for cleaner fuels. Businesses need certainty to feel confident, making the investments that we want them to make to retool and grow and create more jobs, and a predictable price on pollution and clean regulations like the Clean Fuel Standard provide that certainty. Si tous les pays du G20 adoptaient ces trois politiques canadiennes, tarification de la pollution, élimination progressive du charbon et normes sur les combustibles propres, le monde serait une bonne voie d'atteindre la carbone neutralité. Nous sommes également en train de décarboniser les principales industries du Canada, accélérer le passage aux véhicules, camions et autobus électriques, et nous faisons des efforts pour rendre nos bâtiments beaucoup plus efficaces. Nous savons, et les Canadiens le savent aussi, que nous devons faire davantage. L'accord de Paris nous oblige à accroître notre ambition au fil du temps. Pour atteindre le niveau de 1,5 à 2 degrés Celsius que la science dit afin d'éviter les impacts des changements climatiques les plus graves et pour saisir les opportunités économiques de l'action climatique, nous devons considérablement relever le niveau de notre ambition collective. This week's federal budget continued to raise the bar. with some $17.6 billion in commitments for the environment and clean growth. We are supporting everything from supply chains for crucial zero-emission battery development to decarbonizing heavy industry and traditional energy sectors, incentivizing major home energy retrofits and clean tech innovation, and further investing in nature. This puts us on a very detailed and concrete track to cut emissions by approximately 36% by 2030. Canada is a big, cold country with thousands of workers, communities, and families whose livelihood depend on providing energy to the world. We have homes to heat in winter, vast distances to travel for work and for commerce. Quebec alone has more than twice the landmass of France, the biggest country in Europe. But bold targets need to be backed by bold action. That is an approach that our government has actively taken. Dans l'avenir, nous devrons continuer à faire preuve d'audace et d'ambition afin d'atteindre notre nouvel objectif et nous devrons nous appuyer sur des réflexions et des idées provenant de nombreuses sources, dont le groupe consultatif pour la carboneutralité récemment créé, que j'ai d'ailleurs rencontré hier. This past year of global pandemic has been like a lab study in climate action, a borderless global crisis that requires government leadership and collective effort, facing down science denialism and misinformation, while enlisting the public in a battle against an invisible foe, investing in and incentivizing the best minds in science in order to come up with solutions that were previously considered pipe dreams, mitigating and adapting and helping those most in need. We will need the same intensity, the same focus and collective effort on climate change that we've used to battle COVID-19. And we will prevail. To quote economist John Maynard Keynes, the difficulty lies not so much in developing new ideas as in escaping from the old ones. We've had to do that in a hurry with COVID-19. We must also do it in the fight against climate change. The way I see it, climate change isn't just obligation and responsibility, although it certainly is that. But climate change and climate action is just as much about opportunity and pursuing the clean growth economy of the 21st century. Nous ne pouvons pas rester les bras croisés devant ce travail. Les plus grandes entreprises du monde, les principaux investisseurs, des dizaines de pays, des centaines de villes et des millions de transactions vont dans la même direction. Very personally, my concern about the environmental crisis that is climate change is what got me out of the clean technology sector and into politics. My belief that Canada needed to have a thoughtful environmental and economic strategy, one that would ensure our continued prosperity in a low-carbon future. Our new emissions target is not just a number, it is a mission statement. It is a promise to the world, to all Canadians, to Canada's youth in particular, including very much my own two daughters, that we as a government and as a country are committed to ensuring that a sustainable and prosperous future remains within our reach. And now I would like to invite my friend and colleague, Minister Stephen Guilbeault, to say a few words.
Merci beaucoup, Jonathan. Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Je me joins à vous de Montréal sur le territoire traditionnel des Mohawks et autres peuples Haudenosaunee. Beaucoup d'encre vont couler après l'annonce d'aujourd'hui et on ne peut que saluer la décision du président Biden de convier, comme il l'a fait aujourd'hui, 40 des plus grands émetteurs de gaz à effet de serre de la planète à ce sommet historique. Le retour des Américains dans la course à la lutte au changement climatique est une excellente nouvelle pour la planète, bien sûr, mais pour le Canada également. Nous avons maintenant un partenaire majeur dans l'action pour le climat. Une chose dont nous ne pouvions que rêver il n'y a de ça que quelques mois. Et ce qui est indéniable, c'est que nous sommes dans l'action, dans une action concrète et réelle pour réduire la pollution climatique au Canada et partout ailleurs sur la planète. Nous sommes, comme Jonatan l'a dit, toutes et tous dans la même équipe face au changement climatique. Et le Canada a de plus en plus d'alliés et nous en avons la preuve aujourd'hui avec ce sommet. Une journée comme aujourd'hui, une journée où le Canada renouvelle son ambition climatique, ce qui est exactement la raison pour laquelle, comme Jonatan le disait, lui et moi, nous nous sommes lancés en politique. Pour faire plus, pour faire mieux et pour le faire plus vite. Ces étapes sont fondamentales et transformatrices. Je suis très fier de notre plan de lutte au changement climatique, un des plans les plus détaillés au monde qui nous permet de présenter cette nouvelle cible ambitieuse, mais surtout atteignable. Ça ne se fera pas, comme Jonatan l'a dit, en se croisant les bras. Et ça ne se fera pas surtout tout seul. On doit explorer constamment de nouvelles opportunités pour nous donner les moyens de nos ambitions renouvelées. Nous avons, comme je l'ai mentionné, un partenaire climatique au sud de la frontière. Mais cette action-là, elle doit être également celle du secteur privé, de la société civile, de nos municipalités ainsi que de nos provinces et territoires. Et c'est ensemble qu'on doit incarner de plus en plus l'argument économique et l'action climatique et encore saisir les opportunités pour aller plus loin et plus vite dans cette action. Comme notre réseau électrique est déjà très propre, et Jonatan en a parlé, on doit trouver d'autres moyens de réduire nos émissions de gaz à effet de serre, notamment au niveau des transports. Si on veut réduire notre dépendance aux combustibles fossiles, ça doit inévitablement passer par les transports. La majorité du pétrole produit tant du côté canadien que de la frontière américaine, que de l'autre côté aux États-Unis, est lié au secteur des transports. Plus nous opérons rapidement la transition dans le secteur des transports par des investissements massifs comme nous le faisons déjà en transport collectif et en transport actif. Et là, je parle d'aujourd'hui, les investissements du gouvernement fédéral permettent la réalisation de plus de 1000 projets de transport collectif partout au pays. C'est du jamais vu, cet investissement-là du gouvernement fédéral. Mais et j'aimerais revenir également sur ce que Jonatan a dit. Si l'ensemble des pays du G20 adopteraient 3 de nos politiques phares, soit la tarification carbone, l'élimination du charbon d'ici 2030 et la norme sur les carburants zéro, le monde entier serait sur la bonne voie pour atteindre la carboneutralité. Donc on franchit aujourd'hui un jalon collectif très important, mais ce n'est pas la fin. Nous sommes dans une crise climatique extrêmement grave. Et je n'ai entendu personne crier victoire aujourd'hui. C'est une poussée dans le dos qu'on se donne tous et toutes. Une étape importante et un élan pour aller toujours plus loin, plus vite. La cible annoncée aujourd'hui, nous comptons bien l'atteindre. Nous sommes redevables aux Canadiens et aux Canadiennes et à l'ensemble de la communauté internationale. Trop souvent, les gouvernements ont annoncé des objectifs sans se donner les moyens de les atteindre. Aujourd'hui, ce n'est pas le cas. Nous avons les moyens de nos ambitions. Le budget de lundi dernier en est la preuve et a mis des fondations plus que solides pour réussir. Nous avons aussi déposé un projet de loi qui rendra responsable l'atteinte de ces cibles et nous espérons que ce projet-là soit adopté rapidement à la Chambre des communes. Se mettre une cible aussi ambitieuse, c'est aussi dire qu'on n'a pas de répit, que nos décisions sont constamment évaluées et que c'est un rappel qu'on doit exiger toujours plus. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour de la Terre à toutes et à tous.
Thank you, Minister Wilkinson and Minister Guilbeault. Merci, Messieurs les ministres. This concludes today's announcement. Thank you to all of those who joined us today. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful Earth Day. Ceci conclut notre événement. Merci à ceux qui se sont joints à nous aujourd'hui. Bonne journée de la Terre à tous.
Okay, Canada Wordmark. And Facebook.
Stop live stream.
Stop live stream.
Done. You can go back to more, right?
Merci tout le monde. Merci, Monsieur le ministre. Nous allons maintenant poursuivre avec la période de questions et réponses. Donc, so please use your hand-raising function if you have a question, and in the interest of time, we ask that you keep your question to one question, one follow-up. The following commands can be entered via DTMS tones using your phone's dial pad, *6 to toggle mute, unmute, *9 to raise your hand. Donc, veuillez utiliser la main levée si vous avez une question. Nous vous demandons donc de vous en tenir à une question et une suivi. Les contrôles suivants peuvent être entrés via les touches de clavier de votre téléphone, étoile 6 pour couper et rétablir le son, étoile 9 pour lever la main. Our first question comes from Emma Graney, The Globe and Mail. Go ahead, Emma. I think you're on mute, Emma.
Here we go. Not on mute anymore. G'day, Minister Wilkinson. How's it going? My first question, I suppose, obviously from the energy perspective, what policies are an option here with the oil sands, and what are they going to look like in 10 years' time if you expect to meet these goals?
Well, a number of the policies are actually in the process of being implemented relating to the oil and gas sector in Canada. I think there's kind of two pieces to it. One is obviously reducing emissions from large emitters and large emission sources in the oil and gas sector. That's what the methane regulations that are just coming into force are about. That's what a number of the other activities around the clean fuel standard in terms of requiring improvements in the carbon intensity of fuels is about. Certainly the price on pollution as it begins to escalate further will have an impact on that. And certainly also the programs around the Net Zero Accelerator and the tax credit for carbon capture and sequestration is about essentially putting in place measures that will enable us to make big emissions reductions associated with oil and gas production. The second part, though, is obviously with oil in particular, it's used primarily as a transportation fuel. And oil that's produced in Canada is either used domestically by and large, or it's used in the United States for transportation. And the second part of this, obviously, is to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission vehicle technology, which will have an impact on demand for oil on a go-forward basis. And so, you know, we do see real opportunity to reduce emissions, but to do so in a thoughtful way that will allow us to ensure that we are creating economies across this country that are going to be strong.
Right. My follow-up there, though, what then do the oil sands look like? I mean, you're talking about pivoting to electric vehicles, hydrogen as a fuel, etc. So do you want to shut down the oil sands? Like, if you're not going to have them powering vehicles, what the hell do you do with all that oil? Like, what's your plan there?
Well, I think, we've always said this is a transition. I think governments around the world have said this is a transition, including, many of the provincial governments, including on the prairies. And I think you've got to treat oil and gas distinctly. I think with gas, there are some really interesting opportunities around the creation of hydrogen, where you actually either capture or drop the carbon out in solid form, and you essentially have zero or very near zero hydrogen that's produced from natural gas. That is certainly a pathway that is, I think, very interesting. With respect to oil, there will continue to be use of oil in transportation applications for some decades to come. But even after that, there's lots of work going on in Alberta and by a number of different organizations, including some of the ones that are funded by the government of Alberta around alternative uses in the future, like carbon graphite and those kinds of things. So I think we just need to work through this. It's going to be a transition. Everybody recognizes that. And we need to get to the point where we're not combusting carbon. That's what net zero means. You've got to get to a point where you're not combusting carbon as a source of energy.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. La prochaine question vient de Christian Noël, Radio-Canada. Allez-y, Christian.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci de prendre nos questions. Ma question s'adresse à vous et aussi à Monsieur Guilbeault, s'il souhaite répondre. On a réduit depuis 2005, entre 2005 et 2009, nos émissions de 9 mégatonnes. Et là, il faut réduire de presque 300 mégatonnes pour les 10 prochaines années. Si le plan n'a pas été suffisant pour atteindre une cible de 30% en 2030, comment est-ce que votre plan sera suffisant pour atteindre la cible plus ambitieuse en moins de temps ou avec une accélération de 5 fois plus?
Peut-être je peux dire quelques mots, mais Steven peut peut-être dire plus. Bien sûr, quand nous avons créé le cadre pan-canadien en 2050 et 2016, 2015 et 2016, nous avons dit que on doit réduire l'augmentation des gaz à effet de serre qui marche quand nous étions élus. Et nous avons fait ça. Le rapport que nous avons donné au public la semaine dernière a dit que nous avons eu beaucoup de succès. Et maintenant, nous avons les mesures dans le cadre pan-canadien et aussi le plan renforcé pour réduire les gaz à effet de serre. Et le modèle que nous utilisons dit que nous sommes exactement sur la place que nous avons dit en 2016. Et nous avons beaucoup de confiance que nous pouvons atteindre nos cibles, mais nous avons mis en place aussi les autres mesures pour être plus ambitieux, comme nous devons si nous nous pensons sur la science. Et Stephen?
Oui, merci. Jonathan a tout à fait raison, M. Noël. On est au début en fait, les inventaires qu'on a vus la semaine dernière, donc ceux de 2019, sont au tout début de la mise en œuvre du plan pan-canadien de lutte au changement climatique. Or, on parle d'un prix sur le carbone qui est autour de 10-20 $, alors qu'on est déjà rendu à 40 $ aujourd'hui. On n'a pas encore des mesures réglementaires très importantes comme celle sur le méthane dont Jonathan parlait, la réglementation sur les carburants propres également, qui sont des mesures qui vont entrer au cours des prochaines années en vigueur. Et ce que l'inventaire de la semaine dernière démontre très bien, c'est que n'eût été du plan pan-canadien de 2015-2016, les émissions auraient été 34 mégatonnes plus élevées. Alors, notre approche fonctionne, le plan fonctionne, et là, on vient en rajouter, on l'a fait en décembre, évidemment, on en a rajouté une couche très importante avec d'autres mesures, des investissements supplémentaires, une tarification carbone qui, je le souligne, nous avons présentement aujourd'hui, pas en 2030, aujourd'hui, le Canada a l'une des tarifications carbone les plus ambitieuses sur la planète. Plus que le Québec, la Colombie-Britannique, même la Californie et l'Union européenne, qui a pourtant qui a mis en place son système au début des années 2000. Et plus ça va aller, plus notre tarification va devenir ambitieuse. Alors, notre approche fonctionne et on veut en faire plus et on veut le faire encore plus vite, d'où les annonces que nous avons eues dans le budget de lundi dernier et cette cible plus ambitieuse que le premier ministre Trudeau a présentée aujourd'hui.
En suivi, si je le puis, les partis d'opposition ce matin disent les libéraux, grands parleurs, disfaiseurs, incapables d'atteindre leur cible. Prouvez-moi que vous allez être capable de le faire.
Bien, la cible est pour 2030, on est en 2021. D'une part, je trouve quand même curieux que certains critiquent la cible. Je voyais notamment le NPD dire que la cible n'était pas suffisante. Pourtant, dans la plateforme électorale du nouveau Parti démocratique du Canada, la cible qu'on y retrouve, c'est moins 38%. Alors, la cible que nous annonçons aujourd'hui est beaucoup plus ambitieuse que celle du NPD. D'autre part, les critiques du Bloc, écoutez, je pense que le Bloc n'a pas de leçon à donner à qui que ce soit. Là, le chef du Bloc, je tiens à le rappeler, a contourné le bureau d'audience publique sur l'environnement du Québec lorsqu'il était lui-même ministre de l'Environnement, pas une fois, pas deux fois, mais 3 fois en une seule année, ce qui constitue un record. Aucun autre ministre de l'Environnement au Québec n'a fait ce genre de choses-là. Alors, nos émissions ont commencé à diminuer, la trajectoire a commencé à diminuer et comme Jonatan l'a dit la semaine dernière, 2019 est la dernière année où les émissions de gaz à effet de serre vont augmenter au Canada.
Thank you. Our next question comes from David Aiken, Global News. Go ahead, David.
Thank you very much. And just before I ask my question, could I get the moderator to, on behalf of all broadcasters everywhere, I just want to see the person speaking. So can you focus with full screen on the person speaking? My question is going to go to Minister Wilkinson. So could I see Minister Wilkinson on full screen, please? Before I ask a question, is that possible? This is no good for broadcasters, guys. We're looking at 3 screens right now. We got Moira, Minister Guilbeault, Minister Wilkinson. Can we just have Minister Wilkinson? Oh, there we go. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. That's, as I say, from broadcasters, this is the way we got to do it. So, hello, North Vancouver. Minister Wilkinson, thank you so much. You have been, at all times, when you've defended your plan to achieve the 30% target, that it's a credible plan. It's validated by many independent third-party experts. Today, you presented a new target. Where's the credible plan to get to 41%? Well, how will you get to 41%?
Well, thank you for the question. I think that's a very appropriate and good question. What we have always said is, Canadian governments in the past have been accused of essentially setting targets with no plan to underpin how they were going to make progress towards the targets. And so when we came into power, we developed a very detailed plan, which gave us confidence and gave Canadians a perspective on the progress that we would make towards the target. But of course, we had more to do in order to be able to fully get to and exceed the target. And that was the plan we worked on over the past year, which we announced in December, to give Canadians visibility on how we would achieve and overachieve that target. We have spent the time over the course of the past few months, looking at opportunities to further advance that, both with respect to work we're doing with the Americans, but also with additional investments that we made in this week's budget. And with that, we see a pathway to getting to 36%. But of course, we are in 2021. The target is 2030. We have 9 more years. And Canadians would, I think I said this yesterday to Adam Rwanski, people would think we were a bit crazy if we said, oh, well, we're done. When the science tells us that clearly we can't be done. We need to do more. And so what we have said is we have a very detailed, concrete plan to 36%. I would tell you perhaps the most detailed plan that exists on this planet. And what we've said is we need to signal that we are going to have further ambition. And that ambition is the delta between 36 and our range that we announced today. We believe it is attainable, that it is ambitious. And it should be ambitious. I mean, I used to run technology companies, and if you said at the beginning of the year you're setting a target that you know exactly how you're going to meet at the end of the year, your board would tell you you're not being ambitious enough. And so what we're doing here is we are essentially providing the foundation, which is the vast bulk of the work that we have to do, and we're saying we need to stretch, and we need to stretch because this is an issue on which we need to be guided by science, and our range is guided by science.
Jonathan, may I add something?
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, David. I was at the first Conference of Parties in Berlin in 1995. I was at the Kyoto Conference in 1997. I attended most of these conferences. I was in Copenhagen in 2009, in Paris in 2016. And when Canada goes to the next conference, the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, Glasgow in November, it will be the first time in the history of this country where we show up to United Nations Conference to put a target on the table that's backed by a plan. We've never done that before. We didn't have a plan in Berlin in 95. We didn't have one for Kyoto in 97. We certainly didn't have one for Copenhagen in 2009. But now we will. It's the first time ever that we've proceeded this way in Canada.
Thank you both. And so the follow-up then, again, just referencing Mr. Wilkinson's earlier comments, that it's so important for industry to who wants and needs some key parameters as it plans significant capital investments. I think at the end of the plan in place, we have carbon priced at $170 a ton. So there's going to be 41% imply a change in the carbon pricing schedule with a higher per ton price on carbon towards the outer years.
No, it does not. The price on pollution is an important component of the plan, and we've provided visibility in order to give industry certainty as to how this will work. We do not intend to change the trajectory. In the same way that we've put in place regulatory mechanisms like the Clean Fuel Standard, where we do not intend to make those more aggressive. But certainly we do intend to continue to look at areas where investment can accelerate progress. I would say buildings, for example, where I think there's more that we will need to do going forward. And there are some areas where we do think that regulations can be more ambitious beyond targets that we've set in terms of years out now. So, for example, in methane, we only have a 2025 target with respect to methane reductions. We're obviously going to need to set a 2030 target, and that's something we're working on with the Americans. The same thing would be true with zero-emission vehicles, where we're working with the Americans on a North American approach as to how we can accelerate the deployment. But no, we do not intend to accelerate the price on pollution. We put the price schedule out there for the very specific reason of providing certainty, and that's what we've done.
Thank you. Our next question comes from James Munson. Go ahead, James.
Thanks very much. Thank you, ministers. Minister Wilkinson, I'm just wondering, you described having a very concrete plan to get to 36, as was laid out most recently in the budget. But today, you're not announcing any detailed plans about how to get that extra 4 to 9% to match the target you're releasing today. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. We as you know, as recently as just a few days ago, announced a number of additional investments that will actually get us to the 36% number. And what we've said is we will need to continue to do work over the coming 9 years, which remain between now and 2030. There certainly are areas where we believe that we can continue to accelerate progress, and certainly I think my colleagues all understand that will mean that climate change needs to continue to be a priority in future budgets. But that is the focus of the work that we will be doing going forward. I think it is important to take a little bit of a step back and just reflect on how much progress on this file has been made since 2015, when, as I said in my speaking remarks, we were projected as a country to be 12% over 2005 levels in 2030. And now we are projecting to be, on a concrete basis, 36, to stretch to 40 to 45. I think based on the progress that we've made, Canadians can have very good confidence that we are going to find those additional tons.
Do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sorry. And in the budget, you mentioned the budget mentions that up to that 36 target, some elements there will come from U.S. alignment. But there hasn't. I mean, up to last week, there hasn't been sort of an official announcement of new measures to align. I'm wondering, have you already made decisions at this point to align Canadian and American emissions policies in ways that will reduce Canada's overall emissions?
Well, we've been meeting quite actively with the Americans, and I would say that the top two areas, I would say, are transportation and methane. And certainly we have talked about ambition that is required in both of those areas. In the methane side, certainly the IEA has given some guidance about what it believes best practices would be, and we certainly are interested in moving in that direction. That would equate to 70 to 75% reductions in 2030. On the transportation side, we're looking at aligning with respect to vehicle efficiency standards and looking at how those can be accelerated going forward, as well as looking at how to accelerate zero-emission vehicles. I wouldn't say we've landed on the specific numbers yet, and I think we all have to give the Biden administration a little bit of a break, given that they've been in power only for a few months. But certainly, directionally, we are fully aligned, and we are going to work through that over the coming few months.
Thank you. Notre prochaine question vient de Hélène Bizetti. Allez-y, Hélène.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur le ministre. Certains partis d'opposition vous demandent d'inscrire cette nouvelle cible dans votre projet de loi C12 sur la carboneutralité. Pourquoi ne le faites-vous pas?
Oh, bien sûr, nous allons mettre en place le cible dans le projet de loi, mais nous devons avoir le projet de loi vers le deuxième vote dans le Parlement et nous pouvons avoir les conversations avec les partis opposition au comité. Mais bien sûr, nous avons l'intention de s'inscrire le cible dans le projet de loi, bien sûr.
Et avez-vous un suivi, Hélène?
Oui, alors une question plus technique, c'est concernant le budget. Je regardais les revenus anticipés de la taxe carbone et je constate qu'à partir de 2022, les revenus restent stables alors que la taxe est supposée augmenter. Pourquoi on n'a pas prévu ramasser plus d'argent avec les années?
Probablement, ça c'est une question pour le ministre de Finances, mais je suis très ouvert de prendre la réponse et d'assurer que vous avez l'information.
OK.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Alex Bonga from the Toronto Star.
Hi, thanks very much. Do you think this new target represents Canada? This is obviously a global fight to keep emissions or keep global warming below 2 degrees. Do you think this new target represents Canada's fair share, quote unquote, in that fight going out to 2030?
Well, I do, and I think it's important to understand that different countries have different economic structures and different opportunities with respect to emissions reductions. I would say if you looked at the Americans, where a lot of the emissions come from coal-fired power generation, which is being phased out largely for economic reasons, let alone for climate reasons, if you just had Canada's one policy of phasing out coal-fired power, you would see their emissions reduced versus 2005 by somewhere between 30 and 35%. That doesn't happen in Canada, where coal forms a very, very small part of our energy generation mix. So we've all got to come up with what is achievable, but also what is ambitious. I think this reflects a very, very ambitious plan, but one that we believe is achievable. And in that context, I do believe that it represents...
That include mandates or sales targets that are legally required? Like my understanding now is that they're kind of voluntary or not set in stone, that car manufacturers don't have to hit those. Is that going to be part of that plan? And how close are we to nailing down those alignment policies that you mentioned with the Americans?
Well, I would just say that without getting too far into conversations that we're having with the Americans, that I think all options are on the table in terms of how to accelerate the rollout of zero-emission vehicles. As you know, there are mandates that exist in some provinces in Canada, both in British Columbia and in Quebec. They are supply-side mandates, but they are mandates nonetheless. And we are looking at all of the available tools to be able to see how we can, accelerate the deployment of these kinds of technologies. For light-duty vehicles, we're also looking at how can you actually ensure that you are moving the technology forward for heavy-duty vehicles such that you can do the same thing on a go-forward basis, because obviously both are really important to reducing transportation-related emissions.
And Jonathan, if I may add,
Sure.
Electrification of transportation is a good example where the collaboration between the federal government and provinces can be of great benefit. If you look at, so the federal government has an incentive for the purchase of electric vehicle, and so do Quebec and BC. It just so happens that these two provinces, by a long shot, are the provinces where we see the highest penetration of electric vehicles. In the case of British Columbia, it's 10%. In Quebec, it's a little bit less. But if provinces want to work with us on that, then it could help us accelerate that transition to a more and eventually 100% electric transportation system.
Merci, Monsieur le ministre. La prochaine question vient de Jean-Thomas Leveillé, la presse. Allez-y, Jean-Thomas.
Bonjour, M. Wilkinson. Bonjour, M. Guilbeault. J'aimerais peut-être prendre le problème de façon inverse. Qu'est-ce qui vous amène à penser que la cible que vous venez d'annoncer est la plus ambitieuse qu'il était possible d'atteindre pour le Canada, alors que d'autres disent que c'est tout à fait possible, d'autres comme notamment M. Guilbeault, l'organisation que vous avez vous-même cofondée, Équiterre, disent que c'est possible de faire davantage. Alors, qu'est-ce qui, vous, au gouvernement, vous fait penser que à ce moment-ci, c'est la cible la plus ambitieuse possible? Je comprends votre volonté d'avoir une cible qui s'accompagne d'un plan, là, mais j'aimerais savoir qu'est-ce que vous amène à penser ça.
Je commencerai à répondre à la deuxième partie de votre question sur l'étude que certains groupes écologistes ont rendue publique hier. Pour avoir, comme vous le savez, milité longtemps au sein des groupes écologistes, c'est le rôle de ces organisations-là de nous pousser dans le dos, de nous garder alertes sur cette question-là, et nous saluons leur travail. Pourquoi est-ce qu'on pense que la cible de 45% est la cible la plus ambitieuse? C'est vraiment le travail herculéen qu'ont fait Jonatan et son équipe Environnement Canada au cours des derniers mois pour regarder toutes les réductions possibles, les mesures que nous pourrions mettre de l'avant pour réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre. Nous sommes, qu'on le veuille ou non, nous sommes un grand producteur de pétrole et de gaz. C'est une réalité canadienne avec laquelle nous devons composer. Et on pourrait prendre l'exemple du Québec où il se consomme encore aujourd'hui quelque chose autour de 360 000 barils de pétrole. Donc, ça fait partie de notre réalité. Nous devons composer avec ça. Le travail des fonctionnaires et de l'équipe de Jonatan fait en sorte que on pense que 45, c'est le plus loin qu'on peut aller. Et vous savez quoi? Peut-être que dans quelques années, compte tenu de développement technologique, de nouveaux partenariats avec les États-Unis, avec les provinces, on arrivera à la conclusion que bon, finalement 45, c'est peut-être plus facile qu'on pensait, mais présentement, avec les informations que nous avons selon les technologies qui sont disponibles, c'est ce que nous pensons. Et je vous inviterai, il y a plusieurs études qui ne sont pas des études qui relèvent du gouvernement fédéral, mais des études indépendantes qui montrent que par capita, le Canada investit déjà plus dans l'économie verte que les États-Unis, la Norvège ou même la Corée du Sud. Alors, nous avons vraiment pris un virage au Canada vers cette transition-là, mais Jonatan et moi sommes les premiers à le reconnaître, il reste encore beaucoup de travail à faire.
Mais comment convaincre les gens de continuer de faire des efforts quand on voit, par exemple, encore ce matin, des pays comme la Chine, le plus important producteur mondial, continuer qui dit qu'il va continuer à augmenter ses émissions jusqu'en 2030, ce qui va donc effacer les efforts de tout le reste de la planète. Comment on peut convaincre les gens de participer à l'effort dans un contexte comme celui-là?
C'est un problème global, la question de la lutte au changement climatique, et tout le monde a un rôle à jouer. Tous les pays ont un rôle à jouer, tous les États, les provinces, les municipalités. Et ce jeu-là de pointer du doigt, oui, mais je pense que ce qu'il faut faire, on a peu de contrôle ici sur ce que fera ou ne fera pas la Chine. Mais on a beaucoup de contrôle sur ce que le Canada peut faire. Et on peut travailler certainement en partenariat avec plusieurs pays, comme on le fait aujourd'hui dans le cadre du sommet, pour rehausser le niveau d'ambition mondiale. Il faut reconnaître que historiquement, ce sont les pays industrialisés nous sommes largement responsables des émissions historiques. Donc, nous avons reconnu que ce soit dans l'accord de Paris de 1992, le protocole de Kyoto de 97 ou encore l'accord de Paris, nous avons reconnu cette responsabilité historique-là. Donc, on a reconnu que nous devions prendre le leadership, et les pays émergents, les pays en voie de développement ont aussi un rôle à jouer dans ce contexte-là, mais on n'est pas au même niveau de développement, on n'est pas au même niveau d'émissions par personne. Et moi, on le voit, je veux dire, la Chine agit sur les changements climatiques. Ils ont un prix sur le carbone. Ils font beaucoup de choses au niveau de l'électrification, au niveau des énergies renouvelables. Donc, je pense qu'il faut, lorsqu'on parle de ce que fait la Chine, je pense qu'il faut regarder dans l'ensemble et pas juste regarder un des éléments.
Et peut-être je peux dire quelques mots. Je crois que je suis d'accord avec les choses que Stephen a dit, mais je crois qu'on doit considérer que il y a beaucoup de choses qui s'est passé ce matin qui n'étaient pas seulement sur les cibles. Mais bien sûr, c'est le Japon, la Corée du Sud, l'Europe. Ils ont fait les promesses avec les nouveaux cibles. Mais aussi, aujourd'hui, il y a une annonce sur un nouveau partenariat entre Inde et les États-Unis pour accélérer les efforts d'Inde, qui est très important dans cette conversation. Mais aussi la Chine a fait une décision il y a 3 ou 4 mois de dire qu'il y a une promesse d'atteindre le net zéro à 2060. Et ça, c'est quelque chose qui est très important. Bien sûr, nous devons travailler ensemble, par tout le monde, pour accélérer les efforts de la Chine, de l'Inde, du Canada et pour les États-Unis. Mais je crois qu'il y a une très, très importante étape aujourd'hui pour avoir une COP qui fait les grandes étapes à l'avenir pour combattre le changement climatique.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Carl Meyer, National Observer. Go ahead, Carl.
Hi, thanks for taking our questions. Why did Canada go with a range here, 40 to 45? Isn't this effectively a target of 40%?
No, it's not, but it's an interesting question. What I would say is it reflects a couple of things. It reflects ambition in terms of continually pushing towards the upper end of that range. But it also reflects the fact that anybody in any country who tells you that they have the exact number that they are going to hit isn't telling you the truth. Models are models. They're based on assumptions, and they're based on forecasts with respect to a whole range of different variables. And what we are saying to Canadians is, based on everything that we know and the assumptions that we've made based on the evidence that exists today, this is a reasonable target for this country. And I think it communicates to Canadians that there is some uncertainty about these things. And so we do need to be on top of how we think about this year in, year out. So I think a range is entirely appropriate, to be honest with you.
Okay, thank you. And for my follow-up, I'm wondering if the government consulted with any of the national Indigenous organizations when you were coming up with this target? Thanks.
Yes. I have been consulting with a range of different folks. Certainly we consulted with Canadians through an online survey, and I would tell you that more than 90% of people who weighed in on that wanted to see a more ambitious target. Certainly have spent time with the provinces and territories, ensuring that we understood their perspectives, and have met with the leaders of the National Indigenous Organizations on at least a couple of occasions to ensure that we were having conversations as we moved through this process, and certainly have committed to all of them that they will be part of the framing of Canada's NDC as we move towards COP26.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Selina Subji from CDC. Go ahead, Selina.
Hi there, thanks for taking our questions. Wanted to say how much pressure was there for Canada to produce a very ambitious target at this summit and towards the 45 part of your range? And, you did show us a path in the budget to how you'll get to 36, but what is the danger in setting a very ambitious target? I know you said you want to be ambitious, but in setting a target when we do not have the path to how we'll get there, what's the danger when Canada has not met its previous climate targets to setting something so high?
So with respect to your first question, I think we felt like we were under a lot of pressure, but it was a lot of pressure because of the science of climate change. The focus for us was on trying to figure out how we could be as ambitious as possible such that we actually keep 1.5 degrees on the table as we move forward to COP. The difference between 1.5 and 2 is quite significant in terms of the impacts that we will see worldwide. And certainly the commitments that exist under Paris right now don't even get us remotely close to 2. So we did feel under a lot of pressure to be ambitious. We certainly have been working with the Americans both ways in terms of trying to highlight areas where we think they could be more ambitious and vice versa. But that would be the pressure that we felt, is pressure to honor the commitments that we've made to our children, that we're going to leave them something that is a workable and sustainable world. With respect to your second question, and I think it's an important question, what I would say is to be moving that number farther up in terms of reductions to ensure that we're actually keeping that 1.5 degree number on the table. That's important from an environmental perspective. It's important from an economic perspective that we're pushing the envelope to try to ensure that Canada is going to be part of this emerging low-carbon economy. And so I think what Canadians will say is, you know what? You guys have a very detailed plan. You've shown us that you actually can make the progress with respect to moving the needle on how we actually gain these emissions reductions. And yes, we agree you need to be more ambitious, and we want to hold you to account that the next year's budget and the next year's budget and the next year's budget are going to reflect that continuing commitment.
And do you have a follow-up, Selena?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Our next question will come from Stephanie Taylor from the Canadian Press. Stephanie, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Hi, thank you, Minister. Why allow the Americans to be more ambitious than us by not matching them with 50 to 52%, with them being our largest trading ally?
Well, I think that's an important question. What I would say is perhaps a little bit of what I said a few minutes ago, which is I think one has to look at the architecture of the economy in which you live and the opportunities for reductions. And what I would say to you is, if the Americans simply took one initiative from the Pan-Canadian framework, in which there's 60 or some odd initiatives, and there's another 60 in the Strength and Climate Plan, and just phased out coal, they would be 35% below 2005 in 2030. Those kinds of tons don't exist in Canada. And I would tell you our plan, based on the structure of the economy, is more ambitious than what the Americans are talking about. It is more ambitious. The marginal abatement costs in Canada are higher. Our plan with respect to if the Americans implemented everything that we've done, the price on pollution, a clean fuel standard, and a number of the other measures, they would be able to far surpass what we're talking about simply because of the structure of their energy system. So I would argue with anybody, our plan is actually at least as ambitious, if not more so, than the American target.
Thank you, Minister. But why not? What stopped you from a 50% reduction target? Not just what we see in the United States, but the EU, the UK was more aggressive. And I take your point that the economies and countries are different in the way they're structured. But what stopped Canada from pledging 50%?
Well, what stopped us was we've said to Canadians from the very beginning that we would be ambitious with respect to climate action, but we would always look to ensure that things were attainable. I'm not interested in putting targets out there that we don't think we can meet. I think that does a disservice to Canadians. I think it does a disservice to politics. If you look at our plan, and I go back to our plan, take a step back and actually look at what's in the Pan-Canadian framework, what's in the Strength and Climate Plan, and the additional elements that were in the budget, I would tell you that there are very few plans around this world that are as aggressive as ours. And as I said to you before, if you looked in the United States and you simply took the one element of our plan, which is the phase out of coal, you get to 35% reductions in the United States. It's completely different. And so, I think what Paris, the architecture of Paris was, countries need to be ambitious. They need to be as ambitious as they possibly can. They need to strive to do more. And that's what we have done in this plan. We have an incredibly aggressive plan to 36, and we've said we have to do more. We need to find ways to stretch, and we are going to do that. But we've always been clear with Canadians, we're not going to lie to you. We have to ensure that this is an attainable goal.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes today's media availability. Donc, ceci conclut le point de presse aujourd'hui. Thank you, Minister Wilkinson, and thank you, Mr. Guilbeault, for joining us. Merci, Monsieur le Ministre, et merci à tous pour votre participation. Bonne journée.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.